In our last video, we covered a few tips for close-up photography. And in this video, we'll talk about macro photography, which you might think of as being similar to close-ups, but just much closer up. To see more detail, macro gives us an opportunity to create artistic images and abstract images using common objects. All right, so let's get to the tips. Tip 1. If possible, move your subject to a more convenient area or setup for the photography. With macro, you'll find that bringing your camera and flash to the subject is pretty common and usually works just fine, but in some cases, it might be easier to work within a setup. Tip 2. Understand the different approaches to macro in terms of gear. A good lens specifically designed for macro work is usually the most convenient option, but these lenses can be expensive. If you don't do a lot of macro, this option might not be feasible for you. But you might want to try other options like diopters, lens reversal, or my favorite, macro extension tubes. These are relatively inexpensive and they can give you great results. They're just extenders that mount between your camera and your standard lens. This increase in distance between the back of the lens and the sensor plane helps allow the lens to focus at a much closer distance than it was designed for. Check out my ebook, Introduction to Close-Up and Macro Photography, for a detailed description of all the macro options. Tip 3. Watch your focus. As you introduce more magnification, your depth of field will become increasingly narrow, even at smaller apertures. So getting the right areas in the frame in focus can be a challenge, especially if you're hand-holding the camera or if something like even a light breeze is moving your subject. The slightest change in distance between the lens and the area in focus will throw the subject out of focus. A tripod can definitely keep the camera from moving, but I often focus on areas by moving the camera back and forth ever so slightly, so a tripod can also slow me down. Depending on the type of gear you're using, you might be able to take advantage of your camera's autofocus feature. If not, you'll still be okay with a little practice and by making sure you take several shots. And later, you can find that perfect shot out of several attempts. Speaking of several shots, you might want to look into a more advanced depth of field increasing technique called focus stacking. With focus stacking, you take several shots, usually with a tripod, and each shot will have a slightly different area of focus. And these shots are all combined later with software to create a single shot that appears to have a much wider area in focus, a wider depth of field. Tip 4. Try handheld flash from a variety of angles. Use a setup like this to illuminate your subject from a variety of angles to create different, interesting looks. It can be a little tricky holding your camera in one hand and your flash in the other, but again, practice helps. You can use flash to isolate your subject, even outdoors. Images like this can be taken in daylight because the flash is powerful enough, especially up close to the subject, to overpower the ambient light. If you want the freedom to quickly adjust the distance from the flash to the subject, or you don't want to think about it too much, you can use TTL to automatically adjust flash power for you. And you can use manual flash for more precise control over flash output. Tip 5. Look past the obvious. Macro can take us so close that we can start to see the object we're photographing in a different way. Tiny areas can fill up the frame like landscapes. And everyday things can look unrecognizable at very close distances, creating opportunities for interesting abstract art. I find that doing macro photography can be a really enjoyable way to use a camera. You can take your time, be as still and deliberate as you like, and you can work in a quiet place that doesn't take up a lot of room. It's easy to lose yourself as you discover new worlds in everyday objects, and all of this helps to develop your eye for design, composition, and lighting, which will help improve the other types of photography you do.